Oh boy, you've got your Starbucks. So yeah,
Yeah,
this is well, you can't really tell. Well, there's Yeti there. So
yeah,
do you realize I had some coffee back in the 70s or 60s or something like that. And we were in Portland, Oregon, and my dad went down to the shipyards down there for some reason. And so I went with him and they have black coffee and I tried it and I hated it. And I about 3 weeks ago, I finally started drinking coffee. But is it really coffee when I put a little caramel drizzle in it and, I put a little just a small scoop of hot chocolate, and actually, I've added some bourbon cream, but it's just a little bit. I can't get drunk on it. But anyway, it's not really coffee, but I like
it sounds like you need some whipped cream too.
it.
Sounds like a dessert.
No, yeah, it is.
Yeah,
So
I
is yours
I drink
do you drink your
coffee
coffee black?
non no, just a little cream, but I've cut down my alcohol quite a bit because I have an 8-year-old son, so I need all the energy I can get, and I cannot afford to wake up, groggy in which way, so I've replaced my nightly beer or 2 with 4 or 5 coffees in the morning, so
That's good. That's a good idea. I have stopped, drinking alcohol. I do some vodka now once in a while, but I actually try to stop because the next morning, I don't have a headache, but I won't go
yeah.
into TMI stuff here, but I really can't go out until probably noon or so, and if a lot of times I get up super early when the sun's rising to go shoot videos, so it just throws me completely off.
Yeah, welcome to old age, everyone listening. It's a good time.
Okay, I don't remember this being a problem in my night well, sure, I wasn't drinking before 21, if anybody wants to know, but I don't remember my 20 I don't remember this problem.
Yeah, I think I got mine in between the ages of 14 and 18. I think I got most of my drinking done. It's a lot more fun, when you're that age.
So, what's going on in California with those fires? Because I thought when I first saw it that they called it the airport fire, and then I saw a bridge, what they call the bridge fire, and I think I've seen where they're allowing people to go home and they're lifting the evacuations. What's happening?
It's hard to keep up. We have a lot of fires. We had 3 huge ones that all hit within a week. The first one was the line fire that was in the northern part of San Bernardino National Forest. So there actually weren't a whole lot of hiking trails. Some hiking trails got hit in that one, but it ended up closing down the wilderness area, the San Gorgonio Wilderness around our highest point here in Southern California, which is San Gorgonio, 11,000 feet plus. So that started. They found out an arsonist started that one. And then shortly after that, we had another fire in Angeles National Forest, which is the one national forest over that was called the Bridge Fire. And that started very close to a popular trailhead at Heaton Flats, which goes to a bridge called the Bridge to Nowhere. And it's a fun hike. You do a bunch of water crossings and you get to this concrete bridge they built, I think in the 30s. Don't quote me on that. Sometime 20s or 30s, they were going to build a highway through the mountains and they didn't. But they built the bridge first, and there used to be a road to the bridge, and the road is gone because of erosion and everything. But that fire started. That was in a pretty remote area. And then right after that, down by me in the Santa Ana Mountains, which is the northern part of Cleveland National Forest, they had some construction equipment. They were moving boulders to stop people from parking so that they didn't start fires. And in the process, they made some sparks with the whatever it was, backhoe or front ends, and they started a fire there. And that one and the bridge fire went clear through the national forest. So they started on one side and burnt all the way through to the other side. Eventually, they were stopped because of those land barriers or because of those property barriers. And obviously, the firefighters are going to go to the property and try to save the structures. But they were huge. And what happened afterwards, which is not so good for us here in Southern California, is that a lot of these areas are closed for at least a year, if not a year. Like the entire forest here by me, Cleveland National Forest in the Santa Anas, is closed until September of next year bunch of trails are closed. So it was pretty devastating. When you live here, I'm not from here originally, but living here long enough, I know when you get wildfire season, when it's hot at the end of the summer and everything dries out, you kind of live on pins and needles because you don't want this type of thing to happen. And it didn't happen the last couple of years. There weren't any real big fires, but this year we got clobbered.
What do they do there when there's a fire? Because, I mean, I know personally, if there was a fire on my property or I had anything to say about it, I would probably go cut all the dead trees down or the burnt trees and let them lay, and then they will help over time to, replenish the forest floor and things like that. And then I'd want to plant new trees, but I don't like to see the dead trees or the burnt trees sticking up in the air. Is there a program that California has that helps to renew a forest?
I don't, not that I know of, and I don't think it happens because of the scale. It's just there's just it's so much land, it's so remote that getting a crew, like for me to hike in some of the areas that were burnt would be a challenge, would be like an off-trail adventure, and to somehow groom that or treat it or manicure it would, I don't think, is a possibility. And the problem we have afterwards, of course, is that when you have a burn, you get these plant species that grow up really quickly afterwards that grow in disturbed burned area. Sometimes those are invasive. Essentially, what's happening overall is, and fire is obviously a natural process, but we've had so many of them occurring naturally and unnaturally that I think there is, in general, if you looked at the last 100 years, probably way more than if man wasn't here. And what happens is a lot of the forest that was once, you know, pine trees and evergreens and big, tall, old trees, old oaks, is now shrub because because those trees have burned and that shrub has grown up in that place. So it's not quite as easy as, just sort of grooming it or dealing with it. And of course, the perpetual problem with the Forest Service is that they don't have a budget for anything. I mean, we have really popular trails here in our national forests, and in the summertime, the trash bins are overflowing, and there's graffiti and different things because they just don't have the budget. People don't want to raise taxes. People don't want more governments, and then it's a balance. And right now, I think it's probably out of balance, but I don't think anyone wants to pay for more Forest Service.
Well, I think here in Colorado, they have a similar problem in that those aspens are really pretty, especially right now. They're starting to turn yellow.
Yeah.
But I think they're an invasive species also. And if you see a landslide or mudslide, whatever it is, or they we have a lot of avalanches depending on the year here. Well, those aspens grow up really fast and they're beautiful, but I believe they're invasive.
Yeah, I'm not positive, but I do know they grow in that disturbed soil, and they're also clonal, so they can clone off the roots, right? So a lot of trees, you have to pollinate seeds, and it's a longer process. That clonal process, I think, goes much quicker, and it's just like another root springing off the root, and that becomes another tree. And if you look underground, all those aspens are connected by one root system. I think the
Yeah.
largest aspirin, I think, is in Utah, north of Zion, in one of the national forests there. But yeah, it's Colorado too. It's just not quite as dry as it is here. When you look at a map, and like, I live in Southern California. I live, I don't know, 10 minutes away from the ocean, but really it's scrub. I think they call it a coastal desert here, and we have shrubs and smaller trees that are not in the high mountains in Southern California. But really, if you looked at it, the only reason we have that, I think, is because the Sonoran Desert, you know, gets tempered a bit by the coolness from the ocean. And if that ocean wasn't there, it might look like, those pictures of the Sahara where you see like the desert going right up to the ocean. I'm sure if the winds were always the other way or it was different, it probably potentially could be that way.
Well, I'd probably want to clarify here. It's probably not that the aspens are invasive, but they just grow faster and they
They grow fast. Yeah.
I think if I've seen places around here too where they're planting some small pine trees, but even if they do that, those aspens may make it difficult for those pines to grow.
What I've learned from, just casually reading about this stuff is that whenever we try to fix things in nature, there's always some kind of weird consequence, right? Like they'll introduce some species, and now the species is killing everything and killing the trees. Or I don't have an answer, but I'm sure there's things they could do probably with more attention. But right now, when a fire like those start in the middle of nowhere, I think for the fire departments, it's really just like protecting structures and protecting people. As a result, the area like that you and I love, in the backcountry in the wilderness, that's sort of the casualty of that, unfortunately.
Well, this year we've had a few fires, and we had a couple right by our house and one up in near Denver. And they brought in, well, the one by our house, they actually have a couple helicopters here in Colorado now. I believe there's two, and therefore the quick response helping to put a small fire out. But then they were bringing in some big, I call them a DC-10 or something, whatever those
Yeah.
McDonnell Douglas planes are, and I think they put on some big pods or something underneath them. They're orange, and I couldn't see them really well, but they've been flying periodically up here, and I know dumping water on some fires. Did that happen there? I mean, was there a big move to get a lot of fire crews and tankers and things in that area?
Yeah, we have. I don't know. I know we have a lot of different aircraft here that handle fires. There's been fires close to home here, which is a more developed area, and helicopters have been here like right away to deal with it. And again, when it's out in the wilderness, it's a little more remote. The trips are longer to get water there. It happens, and I think that's how they contain it. But based on the scale, I think they have to strategically pick and choose where they're going to put those aircraft and what areas they're going to hit. I did see, unfortunately, in one of the fires that people were flying drones, to get shots of the forest fire and the aftermath, and they have to down the aircraft when that happens. It's on average an hour that the aircraft have to stop flying when those drones go up. Yeah, I mean we have them. I think it's just too big. I've been to Denver before when there's fires, and I remember the air quality in Denver. This was a couple of years ago. They were saying don't go outside because the air quality was so bad. And luckily we didn't get that here where I am because the air blows off the ocean. But I did look at those, the trails. You can look at the satellite photos and see where the smoke goes, and the smoke goes hundreds, if not thousands, of miles. Those ones they had up in the Pacific Northwest a while ago. I think the smoke went to New York City. Might have been last year or 2 years ago. It's just insane the scale and the impact of all of this stuff. I don't know what the answer is. I've talked to some people who work as firefighters. Two people have told me with managed forestry, you can essentially, and I'm sure I'm butchering this, so don't send me hate mail, but you can essentially create fire breaks by foresting certain parts of the forest. So, creating perimeters so that when a forest fire does occur naturally, it'll run out of fuel at some point where that area has been logged, you know. But I don't know. I don't know enough about it, but I know that it messes my stuff up. So all the time when I go out and test satellite communicators and GPS units and everything, I do that in the Santa Ana Mountains here. And now I cannot go in there, at least not legally. But I'm
You
not
can come
breaking
to
the law, by the way.
Colorado.
I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we don't have many fires here right now, so there's good trails up here. So I remember a really bad forest fire, and man, it was in Oregon. It was Southern Oregon, and it was Sutherland out west of Sutherland, and it was a big fire. It was in the BLM land, and I think it was probably about 1980. And I was at a football game, and I could see this massive cloud of smoke out west where our house was, and we were quite a ways out of a small town. And I remember going after the game, and I was in the locker room, and I hadn't even got my pads off yet. And the coach came over and said, "Don't even bother showering. Get your stuff and go." And my parents were waiting, and of course, my dad was, all the fire trucks were out there, and they were trying to stop everybody from going in. And my dad's like, "Dad, you're not stopping us." So we go in, and that fire is within, I mean, I want to say a couple miles. It might have been 5 miles or so, but you know how fast those fires move. And
Yeah, yeah.
he thought it was a good idea to put bark mulch around our house to make it pretty. And we had a bunch of fir trees around our house, and we were in a trailer at that point. We were on about 30 acres. He was out there watering the bark mulch, and I just remember the panic that was as a young kid, and I think I was maybe 8th grade, so ninth grade. And I'm just kinda curious, I mean, what have you seen with people there and your experience, and have you been in other situations too where you're really close in and maybe you're in it and trying to get out? I mean, that's not a fun place to be. What have you experienced with that?
Yeah, the closest one that came here was probably 10 miles away, but it was close enough and it wasn't huge. It burnt one of the local parks here, one of the county parks. Everything was covered in ash. All of our cars, everything outside was covered in ash. We evacuated. We stayed in a hotel in Los Angeles because we didn't know what was going on. But it's scary. I think it's especially scary if you own a house, like you mentioned, in the area, and you've worked so hard to get that house. I heard a story about one of the guys in Cleveland National Forest. They have these cabins that were built in the 1920s when the Forest Service used to allow people to build cabins in there and lease the land. And now I think you can buy them. And he had, didn't seem like a real high roller affluent guy, seemed like a real hardworking guy who would save for a long time to buy this cabin so he could go on the weekends, and it had burned. And just to see like the devastation on his face, to work so much for something and then just have it gone. I can only imagine what that's like. Luckily, I haven't had to deal with that. And we've had other structures burn here. The area up by Wrightwood, which is where there's a ski area, that area burned. A bunch of campsites have burned. It's just, I think it's just a tough one to swallow because you feel so powerless, right? You can't really do much. You can water some people, like you said, like your dad did, like they water their houses down and they do things, and sometimes it works. But in general, you sit here. I remember when these fires were happening a couple weeks ago. I'm sitting here. I'm looking at the fire maps, and I'm looking out the window. I can see the big mushroom cloud from the smoke, and I'm just, you're sitting here and you're sitting, you're just slowly saying bad words to yourself, like, "Oh, how can this be happening?" It's just that feeling of powerlessness. I think that's tough.
So I've wondered about this, and my wife and I have had an argument several times, and we had actually a grass fire right by our house this year. And that's actually when we saw the helicopter dropping water, and there's fire crews out on the land on a ranch right next to us. And my daughter has done a lot of, well, I don't say a lot, but she's done some search and rescue training with a team in Gunnison. And so I'm sitting here with my binoculars and looking out, and the fire's a mile away. It's a grass fire. Can't move that fast. Go on. And she's like, "Dad, we got to be ready to go." We have 3 dogs. My wife wasn't home, and my son wasn't home either. So my daughter and I, and we're watching the fire. And my daughter, oh, she also was working. She was training with the Gunnison Fire Department in their fire academy, and it was all around the time of COVID. But she had got enough training, and so she's like, "Dad, we gotta go. We gotta get ready to go." And I'm sitting here going, "Come on." I mean, we don't. And so she's thinking about, "Okay, what do we need to take?" And so her and I were talking about it, and her and I tend to agree more on what's important, and my wife and I don't. And I'm not gonna give grief to anybody about this because I might be wrong. But she wants to go grab all the photos, and I'm like, "Well, I can remember all the stuff. I don't need photos. I'd rather go grab, the important documents or I'd probably grab the dogs and important documents, and she'd probably grab photos and whatever." I don't know. Do you and your wife have any arguments about what's important to grab in a situation like that?
I don't. Yeah, I mean, when we evacuated, we took our documents. We were able to see eye to eye on that. Luckily, my wife isn't so into all the other stuff. So yeah, we took our documents. But I remember I lived on a sailboat for a long time and sailed around. I remember, you have a ditch bag and you'd have some stuff in there, and your paperwork and different things you'd carry around with you. I don't live in a place that's quite so volatile. But if I lived more closer to the fires, I probably would have like a go bag, something to just pop out with. But yeah, it's tough, right? It's what do you take? What do you take when you don't know what's happening? Yeah,
Yeah.
one time I was hiking. This was like 3 years ago, right after COVID, and I see a big mushroom cloud of smoke. I'm in the Santa Ana Mountains, probably about 6 or 7 miles away. It's close, and you're thinking it's not going to get here, and the cloud's getting bigger and bigger. And luckily, I knew that area well, and I knew how to evacuate. But when I look at interviews and stuff from people, everyone the common thing is that people didn't expect it to be on top of them so quick. So if anything, I would say, if you're close to one, just be ready to go. Better be safe than sorry.
Yeah, well, you have a lot of high winds. What do they call them? The Santa Anas?
Yeah, we get those. Usually the wind comes off the ocean here, so it's pretty cool. But a couple times a year, the winds reverse and the winds come off of the desert, off from the Sonoran Desert by Palm Springs. They come through this pass, the Cajon. Is it the Cajon? I'm not sure. They come through the pass by San Jacinto and San Gorgonio, and it funnels them and it makes them quick. And it usually happens in the fall when everything's dry. And I remember when I first moved out here, there was a forest fire that was started because somebody was golfing and they hit the ball with like a titanium driver or something, and it had a spark, and the spark hit the grass and started a forest fire. So it doesn't have to be people lighting off fireworks or anything. It can be something so simple as just a golf club, which is pretty crazy. But yeah, it's not a good area. If you don't like fires, don't move to Southern California or anywhere in California or the West Coast, probably.
Yeah, I mean, well, Oregon, Washington, and the
Yeah,
last couple of years or so up in Canada.
Canada. Yeah. Well, it was neat. There's a service for the inReaches. I did a video on it. It's called Adiana Alerts, and it's like an emergency alert that you can get. It's a pay service, but it is neat, and you can specify where you want the alerts for. And there was a couple or family in outside of Jasper, and they got the alert that the forest fire started, and they were able to get off the trail, which is a cool thing. And I also saw that Starlink just did a push. This was a couple weeks ago, but they did an emergency alert push to people off the grid via satellite, not just T-Mobile customers, but anyone, I think, with an LTE phone. It was in a test area, and they were able to push that emergency alert. So that's huge, right? Because when you're out there hiking or hunting or whatever, like, you don't know what you don't know, and if something's happening, it doesn't necessarily even have to be a fire. It can be any kind of natural disaster or bad weather coming in. Being able to get those alerts, I think, will keep people safe.
It's really actually fascinating to think about is all the technology that's advancing right now.
Hmm.
What's going to happen in a year or 2 years. It can be really fascinating to watch and see.
Yeah, I look at this time now with satellite communications and everything. It's almost like the Wild West, right? There's not a whole lot of stability. There's not really a lot of regulation. Like, people are just shooting satellites up and seeing what happens. And it'll change at some point. But it's an exciting time to be you know into this kind of thing, because there's all this innovation and all these new things. And we had kind of mentioned over email, like Garmin InReach Messenger Plus. But it's interesting to see, like, what happens in like the arms race of technology, right? Starlink pushes this emergency alert. Garmin has images over the inReach, and it's just moving. But I think at some point, I think the Starlink technology, like just the 5G tower on a satellite where you don't need a special modem in your phone or anything, that will be the game changer. That will give everyone at some point connectivity in the outdoors. That will be probably the one, in my estimation, that will win out the technology. But who knows? Who knows what's next?
Yeah, I've been wondering about what satellite communicator market will look like in a few years. I think there's
I,
always going to be the need for somebody who's doing some real hard, outdoor stuff, and they still want that really rugged device. But yeah, we're going to see some major changes.
yeah, I think it's gonna be a lot like the handheld GPS market, right? It's gonna be, like, I don't know who buys aside from people like us who buys a handheld Garmin GPS anymore, unless you're out hunting or hiking or doing things rugged where a phone's not going to do it for you. But the majority of the people are going to go to, Grand Canyon or a park, and they're going to use their phone and all trails, and they're going to go for a hike, and it's fine. I mean, that technology, I'm sure if you showed that to a Native American 300 years ago, they would be like, give me this. I want this. I want more. It's revolutionary. But I think the satellite communicators will eventually be niche.
So, were you actually happy to have a satellite communicator with you in an alternative mode of communication, during this fire? Or maybe it's not this fire, because I think you have a lot of pretty good cell service there.
Yeah.
But was that ever a thought, and were you glad you have some of that capability?
It's nice to have. I carry a satellite communicator with me all the time because I'm crazy. But um, I carry the Motorola Defy, that little unit. It's like, I don't even know what it is. It weighs nothing. It's just like a little piece of plastic, and it doesn't work everywhere. And sometimes, it's been working decent for me, but it doesn't work 100% of the time, depending on the unit. And I think that has to do with the antenna and the broadcast power on those units. But I have it because if I'm driving or if I'm somewhere, I just want to be able to ask for help regardless of whether I have a cell phone signal or not. And I think it's good practice. I know people who are veterans and everything, and have been pilots for a long time, and they will carry a PLB or a communicator with them all the time too. And it's not a big deal, right? It's just a little piece of plastic you put in your bag. But it's nice to know that you have that. That said, you'd be interested in hearing this. So the new Pixel 9 satellite enabled Android phone, it uses Skylo, which is a different satellite system than what the inReach uses. It actually uses Inmarsat and different geostationary satellites, but it uses Garmin Response to handle the SOS call. So I reached out to Garmin. As you know, you can do a Garmin test, right? You can do the test with the satellite. So I filled out the form, and I was half thinking there's no way they're going to allow me to do a test on the cell phone, because this is really aimed at people who bought an inReach. And sure enough, they said, yeah, you can do it. So I went to the Santa Ana Mountains, the ones that just burned down. This was a day or two before the fire. And the way it works with a cell phone is that if you have a signal, it'll dial 911. If your carrier is not in the area where you are, it'll look for other carriers. So if I'm on T-Mobile, it'll look for AT&T signals, and it'll put a 911 call through that way. And after that, it will use satellite. And I went to these crazy remote places in the Santa Anas, like canyons in the middle of the forest, where there's nothing. You would never expect that you would have any kind of cell phone. And when you look at the phone, I've been going there for years, no signal. And I tried to do this test, and every time it would connect me with the cell phone signal. So the lesson for me there was there's probably a lot more areas that are connected by one carrier or the other with your cell phone. And if you have your cell phone, obviously it's a little bit easier to call for help, because you can talk to somebody and describe the situation. So I thought it was interesting. There's probably a lot more coverage than we think. Not a reason not to have a satellite communicator, but worth knowing.
I've been doing a lot of comparison videos recently, and my daughter, she's actually giving me grief. She's like, "Man, Dad, you're doing all these comparisons." I'm like, "Well, I had about 5 months off, and I needed to get back in, so doing some comparisons were quick and got me back in the game here."
Yeah.
But every time I do a review and compare the Defy to something else, I'm kinda giving them a little bit of grief, and I've said several times that I think you like the Defy a little bit more than me. So I just wanna let you know I'm sending people your way, and I try not to give them too much grief, because it is good. You gotta have I think everybody should have something, like, as you do, and I
Yeah.
do.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sending my way. Yeah, I've had mixed results with that. So I have another phone that I'm gonna put a review up for. It's called a Yuli phone. It's one of these Chinese phones you see on Amazon, but it's rugged, and it's got the bullet service over Skylo built in, and that performs worse than my Defy. And I think a lot of it, like I said earlier, has to do with the antenna design and the transmit power. I think Garmin and Iridium have had a lot of time to dial that in. I think Apple took a lot of time to figure that out correctly, and obviously they're working with Global Star, who's been doing stuff for quite a long time too. And it's so bizarre with that Motorola Defy. Like, I'd say 95% of the time it works for me. And when it doesn't work, it's not logical. It's not like, oh, my view to the, north or the south or whatever is blocked. It'll be in clear blue skies on, somewhere in a parking lot. It doesn't work. I just don't know what it is. I think there's obviously more factors involved than just the logical, like make sure there's a clear view to the sky, which I mean, you must giggle when you read that these days too. Make sure you have a clear view of the sky. Yeah, sure. I'm going to pick the place that I get hurt and make sure I have a clear view of the sky there. But and we know that they work regardless, most of the time anyway. But yeah, I think there's potential. It was exciting when that came out. Maybe there'll be a new device or something. I don't know. And it's tough too if you haven't been following it. If you're listening, the company that started that, called Bullet. I don't know the exact what exactly happened, but something happened. They went under, and then somebody bought them. But the people who run the backbone of that service, which is Skylo and Overwatch and Rescue, kept the lights on so that if you bought an account, it kept going, which I thought was a very cool thing to do. And now another company has it, and they are evidently it's still working. I mean, I tried mine a week or two ago. But have you found that it doesn't work for you in a lot of places, or what's the issue on your end?
Yeah, I haven't tested it physically as far as going out and turning it on. I've just been comparing it and going back to other field tests I've had earlier this year, I think maybe in the spring. And what I found was it was working really well when I was in the city because I've
Hmm.
got cell service
Oh,
and there was no problems. But when I went out to Woodland Park down by Colorado Springs and I started heading north into the mountains, and then I was meeting a buddy up there up at Cheeseman Canyon, which is a great fishing spot, but there's so many people that go there that it gets a lot. There's a lot of pressure on the fish. Well, I was heading that direction, and you can, as you know, the mountains are pretty steep in that area. And I was heading north, and I had the Defy in my windshield, sitting in my dash, and I started having problems then. And as I wound my way through the mountains, the tracking, being able to see myself on the map when I was sending messages, they weren't going through regularly. But when I finally got up to the mountains to the campsite and I was high up and I got out of my truck, then it worked fine. It's just to me not as reliable or consistent as some of the other devices.
yep, yeah, 100%.
So I want to ask you a question because I've started to get into ham radios and I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are on having other types of emergency communication. And we've talked briefly in the past, and I like we were talking earlier today is cell phones is the first mode, and then you've got satellite communicators, and then I started getting into ham radios, and I'm studying for my general or my technician exam, and so I'm starting to get into that. I've got a handheld ham
Nice.
radio, and then you've got portables and base stations, and then there's satellite phones. And I'm just kind of curious if you've been thinking at all about that, about is it important to be ready for other things? And I'm just going to throw out one thing, because satellite communicators and ham radios in places where there's natural disasters such as hurricanes, it's important to have.
Mhm.
Do you need to have them both? Is there a reason to have a ham radio? Have you had any experience with ham radios? What's your thoughts on that? And maybe the need to be ready and be prepared to be able to use a ham radio?
Yeah, it's interesting because whenever I talk about satellite communicators, there'll always be somebody who jumps in the comments and says, "What are you, stupid? Why are you using a satellite communicator? Just use a radio. There's repeaters on that hill," or something like that. Um, I was, believe it or not, when I was a kid, I had a shortwave radio, and I was super into a hobby called QSLing, which is listening to shortwave radios from around the world, stations, and you write them a letter and you say, "I heard your station." You give them a report, and they would send you a postcard back called a QSL card. It might stand for quality of service. I don't know. Don't quote me on that. But it was a super fun hobby. This is before the internet, the olden days, before when George Washington was president. And it was so much fun because of the way that ham radio, at least on the bands that I listened to, propagated shortwave radio. you could hear stations from like Indonesia, like 1 watt station from some little island in Indonesia. It was such a fun thing to do. So I'm familiar with ham radio. We used to make like optimized antennas and directional antennas, and it was a great way to learn about that stuff without knowing I was learning about that stuff. And then later on, when I lived on a boat, I had an HF radio, for communications, because there were satellite phones, but they were, if you think they're expensive now, 20 years ago, they were obscenely expensive. I have used them. I'm familiar with it. Today, I I don't know. I don't like if the world fell apart. I don't know what that would mean in terms of the infrastructure. Would ground stations work for satellites? Would cell towers work? I think realistically things would just stay on that don't need tending probably. But I don't know. And I think having a cell phone and, at least for me, a couple satellite communicators, I think I'm okay, but I live in an area that's more developed. For you, where there's bigger, more wide open spaces, if you can do it, I think it's probably a smart thing to do.
Well, what about, say, take the handhelds for example.
Mhm.
And I had somebody ask me a question the other day, and they said, "Why have a ham radio when I can go to any sporting goods store and pick up a couple inexpensive radios and be able to communicate within a couple miles?" And anyway, I was talking to them about it a little bit. I mean, but what's your thoughts? Why? Because on a ham radio, even with a handheld, if you want to communicate on it, you have to have a call sign. You have to have passed the exam.
Yeah.
What I don't know, what's your thoughts of the handheld versus what you can just pick up at any sporting goods store?
I wouldn't trust what you pick up in a sporting goods store with any kind of serious emergency situation. Those are great when you're camping with a buddy and you want to be able just to talk back and forth. Somebody's on the other side of the lake fishing and you want to be able to say, make sure the beer's cold when I get back, that kind of thing. I would not depend on that in an emergency. I think if you really want the hardcore deal, you need to get your license and you need to get a handheld and you need to know how to use it and where the repeaters are. I'm It's been a long time since I've been in that world, but you really have to be on top of it. It's a commitment, but I think if you're serious about this kind of stuff, it's probably worth it. I mean, do they still make you learn Morse code? Is that the first thing as part of the test?
No. Yeah, no,
Oh,
that's changed. So on the technician, I'm not sure about the general and the amateur. There's 3 exams. I think you have to learn it on one of them, but you don't have to learn it for the technician anymore.
yeah, that was the hurdle. That was the thing that would weed out the people who are not serious versus the people who would be dedicated enough to learn Morse code. But yeah, maybe I'll do it. I just my problem is having enough hours in the day. But
So I did tell the person that my non-professional experience, because I'm just getting into ham radios,
nice.
was that if you're going and grabbing something at the sporting goods store and you're comparing it to a handheld and you're out, like you said, you're out with your buddies, maybe there's not a big reason. I think there is. And I'm pretty sure some experienced ham radio operators would tell me to be quiet right now and let them do the talking. I think what I told him though was when you get into the portable stations and the base stations, and you can communicate hundreds of miles or halfway around the world. Well, there is a big difference in the reason for them. So that's kind of where that conversation ended. I wanted to ask you because we touched on this a little bit earlier, and the new Garmin Messenger, InReach Messenger Plus came out. And have you tested that at all? And what are your thoughts? And I just want to add one thought with it real quick is it is nice because you can still do a lot of things on that device itself, just like the InReach Messenger, but it's really meant for syncing to your phone and you get a lot more features. And I've been looking at it some. In fact, I was out just testing the trackback on it this morning, and it looks like there's a lot of features there and things that I personally like. But what's your thoughts so far? Have you looked at it?
Yeah, I got it. I've tested it. I'm gonna do like an initial review shortly, probably. But as a geek who lives in this world like you, it's cool that it uses a different technology. It's not using the Iridium short burst technology. It's using Iridium Certus, which is a different, essentially Iridium product to send messages. I'd expect that to come. I'd expect there to be, and I don't know anything from Garmin, but I'd expect there to be a Garmin Mini 3 that does the same thing shortly, and a new GPS map. I'm kind of looking forward to those more than this. I think for the Messenger, I do appreciate with the Messenger Plus that they finally allow you to connect to Garmin Explore. I don't know why the original Messenger did not connect to Garmin Explore. Just maybe there's a reason, but other than them just trying to throttle that. But I think this is a way for them to get a device out quickly, have a little bit of a competitive edge over the free messaging that you get on an iPhone now. A little bit, it's interesting. It's nothing for me that I would say you got to upgrade your inReach unless there's a specific reason why you need to share pictures or something with people. I really wish that Garmin, and maybe they are behind the scenes. Like I said, I have no input with Garmin or insight there, but I really wish they were working with Starlink or Iridium behind the scenes to come up with something that's going to be really competitive with a cell phone. I always thought there should be and I think there was at one point, like a Garmin cell phone, right? Make a Garmin cell phone with just standard Android and bake in satellite communications and build it into the messenger so it all works together. Like something like that would be a thing that people would consider strongly, I think, that outside of this niche. But to get back to the original question about the Plus, I think it's neat. I don't know if I would recommend it unless you had a specific reason why you wanted to do the pictures. I'd say maybe wait until Garmin comes out with a more user-friendly device in terms of the buttons. Like you said, it's meant to be used with the phone. Using those little buttons in the front is not a good time. I really like over time my GPS Map 67 because I like that big screen. I like being able to see the messages on that big screen. Imagine a GPS map that's big that maybe has a keyboard that you can pop in the bottom, like a USB-C keyboard, like the Blackberries. Like something like that would be game changing, I think, for people in the outdoors. But I'd probably wait to see what happens next from Garmin.
Well, there's also the ACR bivy stick mesh that's coming out. I've been waiting for that. And I want to ask you a question about this because I thought, and I was incorrect, that I I get reminded all the time about, hey, you said this and it was wrong. Well, I do my best. Sometimes I'm not correct all the time. But I thought that you could see other people, other users, inReach users on the Garmin products when you had the Pro plan, which I was just talking to Garmin tech support recently this week, and they said, no, it's not true. You can when you're using the Tread series, and you can correct me on anything here if I'm saying anything wrong. If you have the Tread series, it's really meant for more racers, and then they've got the maintenance vehicles, and they've got the crew, and you can see where everybody's out with that. But you're paying a lot of money, and most of us aren't going to go out and get that. What I've really liked with the ACR bivy stick, and I haven't tested this out yet, but I really want to. In fact, what I'm going to do when the mesh comes out is I'm going to buy two, and I'm going to get one for myself and my wife because I'm getting her a day pack and getting her all set up because I'm tired of carrying her water. I told her, so, we're going to get the ice trekkers and the trekking poles and a pack, and we're going to do a lot of stuff this winter. But I want her to be able to, if we get separated at all, to be able to, we can see each other and communicate. And it's a simple device. And for her, I think she needs something more simple. I'm not saying this so anybody gives me any grief. I mean, some people just want, or they're just not tech minded really, and they don't want something like the 67i. So I'm really excited about that mesh coming out. And I don't know if you've heard, any more when it's coming out. I think they're waiting for FCC approval, or that's one of the last things I heard. But I'm really interested in that. What's your thoughts are you looking forward to that? Have you heard anything?
I have not heard anything about that. You can, if you have share your location on inReach and you do an inReach to inReach message. I have a video on this. You can see the other person on a map.
Right.
On the ones that have maps, so the Montana or the 67, and on the Mini 2, it'll just be a point. It'll be a waypoint. It'll give you a straight line. So it can be done, but that's another area where I wish Garmin would innovate because it's definitely possible. It's like we can see it work. They just haven't put it into an interface that works, and those are the kind of things that just disappoint me about Garmin. They bought inReach from DeLorme, and that seems like they just kind of which is how this electronics world works, but they just kind of notch it up a little bit. They put a couple new features in, and I wish they would really break it apart and be like, yeah, it would be great if other people could see each other on a map. That would be something they could charge more for, right? Like having that ability, throw on whatever that fee would be per month to have the ability to see all your buddies on a map. Why not? You can definitely do that. Technically, there's not a reason why you can't do that. If you can share your location and you can send the location back and forth, there's no reason why you can't store that in an inReach and show it on a map. They just haven't pushed the operating system or built that functionality yet. But anyway, I haven't heard about the ACR, and when it does, I'll check it out.
Well, I think Garmin and all these others might be doing more behind the scenes right now with the advances with the iPhone, with Starlink. They're going to have to do something to stay competitive. And as you said, part of it might be they combine together to create something that's more beneficial for all of us in the future.
Yeah, and listen, so right now these satellite services on the iPhone, from what I know, they're reserved for Apple, right? They're not open to developers. But that's just going to be a matter of time once they can monetize that usage, right? Once somebody's collecting money for every time a satellite byte goes up or down, then there's no reason why they can't open that up to developers. And then there's no reason why you can't have apps that do exactly that, right? That broadcast. If somebody wants to pay and get updates every minute on where all their friends are, and they're willing to pay for those updates every minute for 5 friends, why not do that and charge for that? That's what's exciting for me when that opens up on Android, when that opens up on iOS. Then you can do like breadcrumb trails using all trails, right? Why not just fire up all trails? They have that follow along feature now. It only works in cell range, but if that would be open, if the satellite would be open to them, then they could do that over satellite. And then a lot of the things, getting a weather report, a lot of the things that inReach does will be available on a phone. A phone's still obviously not a rugged device, but it'll definitely change the equation in terms of how this all shakes out and how people make decisions on what they're going to buy.
It's exciting.
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious though, what big adventures do you have going on this year? I mean, are you going to climb Everest anytime soon? I mean, what's up?
I'm gonna go into space on that Jeff Bezos space capsule. I've saved
You
up
might
$1
get
billion.
stuck for a while.
I'm doing this 50 high point challenge in the States here. A little bit different than the normal ones. Normal high points. I'm not going to do any mountaineering. It's just like, what's the highest point that I can hike up safely? Essentially, that's what it is. So that's been fun because in states like Alaska, where obviously the high points, Denali, finding a point that has a trail on it that's the highest has been a lot more challenging than I thought it would be. Alaska is a great example because Alaska, there's so many mountains in the interior of Alaska that are just, inaccessible. So turns out the highest point that I can find is for a mountain peak is a little over 6,000 feet, which you wouldn't think in Alaska. 6,000 feet. It's not. I mean, you're from Colorado. It's not that big, but that's fun. So I'm working on that. It's constrained by time and money, unfortunately. But I'm going to South Dakota in a couple weeks, and I'm going to do the high point there. I think it's called Black Elk Peak. I'll do some more of those. Maybe bag Guadalupe Peak in Texas when it gets a little cooler. But that's a fun one for me. I was going to do a bunch of hikes here around Southern California, update my guides. If you're not familiar with my channel, I do, gear, but I also mainly do trail guides. That's my main thing, I'd say. And I was going to do a bunch of those this fall, and now everything's closed. So this 50 states challenge might be the move for me. And yeah, that's what I got going on big. Nothing huge. I was supposed to go to Mount Fuji in Japan, but the weather was bad, so I wasn't able to do that. Yeah, that's what I got going on. Nothing too crazy, but I'm excited. It's fun for me to go somewhere new and hike, no matter where it is. Like I'm excited about going to South Dakota. I might be one of the only people. Sorry if you're from South Dakota, but not normally the reaction you hear from people when they say they're going there. But I'm excited to go. It looks beautiful. It looks fun, and I don't know. You probably feel the same way. Like when you go somewhere new, you have that feeling of adventure. You're like, oh, this is the coolest thing ever. And that's what kind of keeps me going in between just testing gear, which can, as you probably know as well, can be a little bit of a grind sometimes, testing satellite communicators, and this doesn't work, this works, this is the same old thing, and it can get a little bit much at times.
Yeah, I've seen several times going through whether it's grasslands and it's flat and there's nothing there, or I'm going through desert and things like that, and where some people may not think it's beautiful, and I'm like, well, you're wrong. I mean, I think you can find beautiful everywhere you're at, any place you go, there's beauty to it. So it's not going to be maybe like what you're used to, but
Yeah, not everywhere is Yosemite, but it's
yeah.
still there's a great, I don't know if it's still active. There's an Instagram account, and I'll send you the link so if anyone's listening, they can check it out. But it was this artist who took negative reviews from TripAdvisor, something about national parks, and people would go to arches and they'd be like, yeah, it's just a bunch of rocks, too many bugs, things like that. So people will complain no matter what. But yeah, I mean, there's so many beautiful areas in this country, especially in the West, that it's hard to get bored here.
Well, yeah, it just made me think of something real quick because when I've been in, Oregon, Washington, gone down to Arizona and driven through Utah and then Oklahoma, Colorado, every place their sunsets are so different from.
Hmm.
I mean, I remember, and I think it's because all the red rocks and sand and all that in Arizona, but it was more of a pink or red color. And I remember up in Alaska, one of those mountains, I can't remember the name, right behind the Anchorage area on the east side, they were pink. The sunsets were beautiful pink, and I mean, you've got to have seen some incredible
Oh
sunsets and
yeah.
sunrises that have changed dramatically from where you go.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, the more you have the luxury of traveling and seeing different places, you notice the small nuances between things like that, like the way the pines smell, the way the sunset is, the way the breeze is. It's just, if you pay attention, you get kind of close into things. It just makes you appreciate it even more. I always think, hundreds, thousands of religions on earth, and everyone believes different things. But like, no matter what you believe, you have to admit that nature, rocks, trees, everything is real. And whatever you believe in is where that came from without any kind of filters from people telling you what it is or how you should look at it or what it should be. It just is. And the more you get into that, just the better I seem to feel and the more fun it is, I think.
I've been hiking a few times with my wife recently, and we're in the pine trees somewhere, and it's a gorgeous view. But then I'm just smelling these pines, and I asked my wife one time. I said, "If you could choose between sight and smell,
Ah,
what would you choose?" And sometimes the smells are so incredible out there. I'm like, I'm not sure what I would choose.
I know that's a tough one. That's a tough one. I think of there's a hike in the Smokies called Mount LeConte. That's a real popular hike. And you hike up, it's beautiful, but I think they're Douglas firs up towards the top. And you can smell them like 10 minutes before you get there. It smells like Christmas. And you're like, oh, it just yeah, that's part of it. Or even just, like when you're in Oregon somewhere and you just smell like that peaty earth, like from like the damp and the moist, like in the Columbia River Gorge, somewhere like that. It's just I love it. That's what it's all about. We talk about gear and stuff because it's important staying safe and I think enjoying things and having the luxury to kind of, be safe and be safe in the outdoors. But really it's about the things that aren't the gear when you're out there. It's like you get the gear so you can enjoy the other things more. And if something bad happens, you're prepared, but you don't need gear to enjoy that stuff.
Man, I'd say we probably need to end on that note. I absolutely 100% agree. What can you tell everybody about, your website, your channel, social media? Can you kind of give everybody a heads up?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, just my website's hikingguy.com. My YouTube channel, I think it's hikingguy.com. If you search for hiking guy, it'll come up somewhere. And I'm trying to get more videos up every week. I'm doing gear. I'm going to do some national parks and do some of the high points. And if you like hiking in the outdoors, hopefully there will be something on there that you'll enjoy.
Well, thanks, Chris. It's always good talking to you, and
Likewise,
looking
Rick.
forward to maybe connecting with you up in the Northwest here soon and maybe out in Colorado. But I like California myself, so maybe I'll get out there too.
Thanks. Well, yeah, we're spoiled for choices here in the West and in the States. And thanks for having me on. I could talk turkey with you all day. So thank you.
Yep, no problem. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Rick.